Hey everyone, thanks again for holding in during the tech difficulties. Actually, there is an Amazon outage right now, so we're dealing with a streaming connection. We switched over to an additional streaming unit, so hopefully this one will hold throughout the stream today. We'll jump into Meta, not only the earnings, also how this has an effect on Metaverse in general, breaking down all of that. My name is Paul Barron. Welcome back to Metaverse Insider. Let's get into it today, and really the news is all about Meta. Their earnings came out yesterday after the close, and of course around 4 p.m. And I think to a certain extent, most people kind of thought that this was going to be the state of what Meta was going to be in terms of the amount of money they were losing. The question is was everybody ready for the amount? And we'll get into that, but before we do, I want to jump to a couple of slides that they had presented, and you'll notice there's a few things on here that actually look pretty good if you think about this from a standpoint of potential growth. So obviously advertising revenues by user and geography, still pretty decent if you compare it maybe to their top quarter in Q4 of last year. They're still holding out fairly well in terms of overall revenue. And interestingly enough, a little bit of growth here in the US and Canada. Additionally, within this, there's some other good elements here in the chart. Here's, of course, their revenue by user. Here's their segment results. Advertising, obviously leading the way. And then there was a little bit here on expenses. Not a lot of movement with the exception of maybe marketing, which I anticipated that we would see more of that. And then let's go through here to net income. Obviously sliding down here right now at 6.6 billion. And then we've got diluted earnings. I don't want to get into that one. Capital expenditures are up. We expected that just because of all the development. Daily active people is growing. So this is another area that shows significant growth over time. And again, this will be one of the key factors for them to be able to recover. Obviously, revenue is a big part of that, but also not losing users, another very big part of the overall situation with Meta. Family monthly active, this is also growing. And then if you look here on their average revenue per person, though it is down again from that Q4 number, which was $939 per person, it actually went up over Q1. So this, again, was a good sign, but definitely not seeing the kind of dips we saw back here in 20, which was when we, of course, had a lot of pressure from, the cerveza illness. So a lot of that kind of moving into where I think the overall is going to be this daily active users also climbing with Meta. Again, this is a big good thing. And I think it's one of those things that when you look at the monthly active users, the daily active users, the overall reach, the fact that revenue hasn't been hit in a very big way, even though we've seen the cost of and profitability go down, the potential for revenue is really big. And I think that's one thing that Zuckerberg, of course, is really kind of touching on. Meta, of course, unit has lost 5.7 billion. This is what he alluded to last year, is that we would be losing billions, and the word was billions, in Metaverse. And remember that the goal of what they were trying to do is really kind of in a position of unlocking the next generation of what the internet will be. So this is something I think we will continue to see more and more losses for Zuckerberg and Meta, in the sense that there's a lot yet to be done. This is just the beginning space. I'll show you some examples of how this compares and what this might look like in a very short period of time. They are really accelerating the potential here. So I'm intrigued and have always been intrigued with Meta and what their plans are, especially last fall when we first got a chance to really see the switch of them turning on. I think for the fact that we have seen less than 1 year of development underway, what you're seeing right now on screen is a very good example of some pretty big advancements. Now, there's more coming down the road for sure. Zuckerberg is unfazed about the $2.8 billion in the Metaverse division loss in Q2. And there's a couple notes here that I thought were interesting. Massive opportunity for a number of reasons. He feels more strongly now that developing these platforms will unlock hundreds of billions of dollars, if not trillions, over time. This is obviously a very expensive undertaking. All of us have looked at that, and I think now, especially in the downtime here within what's happening within not only Metaverse, but also gaming ecosystem in general, people are starting to realize just what it takes to be able to roll out something of this level of technology prowess. So it's not an easy task. There are a lot of factors at play here, and there's also some competitors. I want to get into a couple of things here. He says, we seem to have entered an economic downturn that will have broad impact on the digital advertising business. In this environment, we, of course, are focused on making a long-term investment that will position us to come out stronger. So they are, like a lot of companies right now, especially in Silicon Valley, prepping for a much longer period of time. As we all know, today is recession day. When we've printed the second GDP that has put us into the official, though not the confirmed, from the economic leaders that we're in a recession. The fact that I think a lot of industry tech leaders already understand this and are already starting to prep for it, I think is a good thing. In the essence of, any kind of business that's out there, you guys know it. If you're in business, the whole point is being able to prep for these kinds of times and at the same time still figure out a strategy or a path in which you can grow. There's a couple of things here on this Ars Technica report. Let me kind of zoom in on this one just a little bit that he kind of got into that I thought was very important. One of the things I think is interesting that it's not really clear up front whether an open or closed ecosystem is going to be better. If you look back to PCs, Windows, clearly that was one of that had a lot more scale and became the default norm that people use. And then, of course, Mac did just fine. But PCs were really the ecosystem and the environment that succeeded. And that, I would still say, is the argument today, is that the PC ecosystem has been the winner, hands down. If you remember tech at all, you probably could look back at a number of operating systems and systems that really did not necessarily make it to the level we are right now, which obviously PC and Microsoft has pretty much owned that. Mac sure has their position, but for the most part, worldwide, PCs and the Microsoft OS system is clearly ahead. On mobile, I would say it's more the other way. There's more Android devices than there are iOS devices, but I think the developed countries in places like the US or Western Europe in kind of are on the high-end side. They're the culture and trendsetters. I do think that skews more towards the iPhone and iOS. So he's talking that Apple really kind of carved out its own niche in terms of the mobile. I would agree with that. I think Zuckerberg is right on in that point. He goes on to talk about Apple as a competitor, which I think is very important to understand, because this is the difference between the open internet and the open metaverse and the closed internet and the closed metaverse, because there's been a struggle around metaverse in general and what this might look like. And I'll explain this in a second, because there's some key things that are starting to happen. But what he says here, Apple is going to be a competitor. I think that is pretty clear. But it's actually a very deep competitor, not just that they have a device that has some features, in their mixed reality. It's a very deep philosophical competition about what the direction of the internet should go. And I'm proud of the investments that they're making to help push forward open metaverse on this and hopefully make a next version of the computing a bit more open. Now, this to me is Zuckerberg's first chance to truly get into a hardware game with Apple, because he has never really been in a hardware game with Apple when you compare the prowess of what Apple has done in a closed ecosystem. Once that you've got a hardware device that can start to pretty much set the boundaries of what kind of services and products you're going to offer, it starts to create a much more closed ecosystem. Software, little different scenario. Social media was a good example of that. There was a lot of competitors that rolled into that. So I think this will be a very interesting arms race overall. The key here is one that I think is very important, and that is how the metaverse is developed out. If you look at this here, the Metaverse Standards Forum, it goes into just how building an open metaverse is really kind of the focus here. Building a set of standards that all companies and developers can utilize is going to be very critical on this, and I think this will be the big scenario to see how quickly we'll see interoperability start to occur. If you look here, it says a typical project, 3D asset interoperability. An example of a type of potential projects forum will host is to exercise 3D asset workflow. So think about this of designers and developers being able to work on multiple aspects of a project from all sorts of walks of life, technology, countries, etc. That would go in the face of everything we've done so far in tech, especially from Silicon Valley's standpoint. And it definitely would go in the face of what Apple has been about over the years. Now, if you look at the principal members here, let's just go down and kind of scan through. You'll see there's some massive companies in here. Obviously, you've got Adobe in here. You keep on trucking. You've got APMG. I mean, this is the A's. So they've done this alphabetically, so you can kind of see the growth of what is potential here. And I think the whole point behind this is that they have really put themselves, meaning all these companies, into a vision of what this needs to look like for an open standards, much like the internet was when you think about how Tim Berners-Lee and what his vision of what the World Wide Web would be was an open standards. And that essentially enabled what we know today as the internet. So I think the metaverse is really kind of in that position right now. They go on to a couple of things that they've done, which I thought was interesting. This right here was and is a series, a mini-series that essentially is looking at how to promote the internet and get it normalized into everyday life. And I think that is going to be needed in today's environment, especially around the scenario of the masses. Because remember, Facebook, Meta, has a large percentage of their audience that are not necessarily tech savvy. So they're going to have to bring that group of audience over to understanding what metaverse means. And then I think they'll start to reacquire possibly some of the other audience that's out there, including Gen Z and Gen Y, and also what we'll see in the emerging markets, which I think will be some growth of the very young audience, which is the under 10 right now. So the potential here is pretty big that I think being able to, I won't say the word dumb this down, but get it into an approachable sense, I think is going to be a real key aspect for where Facebook has to go. Now, the issue is this, is that when you're a company the size of Meta and you're making these kind of plays, now granted, you may love or hate Meta. The scenario is that we've watched them do a lot of acquisitions over the years. So the FTC is watching them very closely. And if you look at this right here, FTC seeks to block the virtual reality giant Meta's acquisition of popular app created within. And these are basically fitness apps. So if you think about what they're trying to do in this area of, move to earn, whatever you want to call it, we're going to see more and more of these kinds of concepts really develop. Here's an example of what they're stating right here. So the FTC is seeking to block virtual reality giant Meta, controlling the shareholder position with an unlimited that's popular virtual reality dedicated fitness app. This is Supernatural. Meta, formerly known as Facebook, obviously is already a key player in this area. So they are already pushing in this position. So instead of competing on the merits, Meta essentially is trying to suck up what is out there that is leading the way. Now, this is one of the things that the FTC does in a big way, is to ensure that it keeps the competition because remember, it's the the overall consumers that are really the ones that get disadvantaged here, because it starts to close in the ecosystem and you get somebody that gets out with an early lead. This is a problem that's been out there for many years. Silicon Valley has faced this. Microsoft dealt with this on an antitrust suit when they were trying to essentially utilize Internet Explorer to try to circumvent what was happening with Netscape in the early days of the internet. So the way they did it was they buried Internet Explorer in a lot of the devices on the OS system, and then they held all of the computer makers hostage that you had to use Internet Explorer. Hence, pretty much dumped Netscape. What happened? Internet Explorer became the de facto browser at that point. This, of course, before Chrome and Google came along. So this essentially is exactly what the FTC is trying to protect against. And if you look at this, this is an illegal acquisition and will pursue all appropriate relief. The fact that they went after this and the FTC is positioned against it, this is a big deal. I think it was going to be one to watch. MetaQuest Store has also become a leading U.S. app platform, more than 400 apps for download. This is in MetaQuest. The acquisition of the Beat game studio gave Meta control of a wildly popular app called Beat Saber. And then further, the agency's compliant notes that according to Within's co-founder and CEO, fitness is the killer use case for VR. So the point would be this, is that we know that fitness apps and fitness functions are going to be one of the VR booms out there. I'm surprised that we haven't seen companies like Peloton, now these other companies really go all in on this area. Again, I think it is because the development level and the threshold to get these developers to do that are pretty deep. So I think Meta is in a position where they realize that they can just buy their way in. So I think the FTC is right in this. But here, lastly, stating Meta already participates in a broader market with its Beat Saber app, does this within its premium rival app, Supernatural. The two companies currently spur each other to keep adding new features. And this is what we're talking about, really competitive natures within the industry so that it betters the opportunities and the offerings for the average user. So a lot happening, I think, under what's going on with Meta. Now, we'll talk about Apple here in a second and what that plays into. Make sure and hit the like button. We'd love to get your feedback on if you like these kinds of breakdowns. We always like to see your feedback on that. We do want to thank our sponsor today, and that, of course, is iTrust Capital. iTrust Capital is one of those, if you're looking at crypto long term, this is one of the ways to go, and that is through a crypto IRA. That's one of those things where you put something in, you start to work it, get your tax benefits, and then, of course, hold. These are long-term positions. So one that we really like, and we've had a chance to work with a lot of different companies. This is the one we chose. 5.5 billion in transactions, 175,000 accounts created. Definitely one of the premium solutions out there when it comes to crypto IRAs. Make sure and use the $100 funding reward. Click the link below, and that helps us out. Let's get into a few other things, which is kind of the Oculus versus Beat Saber and all of that, because you've got a variety of headsets that are really kind of in a position right now. They're trying to take the lead. I would still say Oculus for now has a bit of the lead. And I think the scenario overall, I just want to show a little bit of footage here. And when you think about just in general where we are, this is very early days, much like early mobile. If you think about the early iPhone, what at that time BlackBerry was trying to do, there was a lot happening around the overall development of mobile in general. And I think that is exactly where we are with the Beats, or excuse me, with the headset side of things. Whether you looked at mixed reality or full VR, whether you like either or both, what we might see really become reality in the next few years, I think, is still up for question. However, with what Facebook is doing, Meta, the fact that they're accelerating this so quickly, and I wanted to show some stats here from FitRated just to show you why they're going after this. Let me go up to this highlights right here. 81% of people would be motivated to stay fit and earning cryptocurrency for exercising. 3 in 4 interested in signing up for gym memberships with cryptocurrency. 4 in 10 would cancel their current gym for a fitness membership in the Metaverse. That's crazy, 4 in 10. And then 60% of people would exercise 5 days a week. I don't think that's true. But if it is, then you understand why fitness could become the battleground for how Metaverse really launches, especially around the aspect of the mixed reality and the VR headsets that companies are in the race right now to develop. Again, I liken this a lot to what happened in 2006 and 2007 when you had the iPhone launch, and essentially you had a struggle between what was happening between Palm, BlackBerry, and Apple. Remember, Apple had never made phones before. This was a brand new component. And I think Apple is in a bit of a run right now with where Meta is going. So Meta reveals its first VR headset prototype designed to make VR indistinguishable from reality. They had a lot here. We showed a little bit about Butterscotch earlier, but I wanted to show some of these elements here just to give you guys kind of a little bit of a run on what they're doing. But just in general, here's some of the prototypes that are being built. You can kind of see the differences here from where we are right now versus where we could be on this version called Butterscotch. So quite a bit different. And what they're trying to do is get into this whole idea around optical distortion, making that more of a reality-based experience. Again, these are the kind of things that starts to normalize how these use cases can be really completed, much like what we looked at when we first started going to mobile and really understanding the use case of a touch screen, just like when we started going into social and understanding the idea of sharing information. These are the kind of evolutions in technology that I think really make it to the next level. Now, how does it affect cryptocurrency, altcoins, all these things? Remember, I think we'll have more and more gaming products starting to move into the metaverse, and the ability to, of course, invest in those via provided we don't get into altcoin security scenarios, which I think we're probably heading that way anyway. But there's going to be a lot of opportunity here, I think, for a handful of big gaming, both in crypto gaming companies, blockchain gaming companies, and the traditional gaming companies. These will be the kinds of gateways, though, that they will be facing. So lots happening in this space. I wanted to jump to this Verge article, too, that kind of goes in here with the strategy that Meta is going about, because there's some things that kind of offset here, but they are raising their Quest 2 headset price $100 in the next month. So if you look at further what they're talking about, what you get in the current Oculus Quest 2, kind of zoom in on that a little bit. You get a 256 gig model, $500. That's going up to 500 from 300, almost 400. That's starting in August. Then also starting August, continuing for the rest of the year, Quest 2 will become a free copy of, you'll get Beat Saber, an exceedingly popular VR rhythm game. That was normally $30. Meta says that the cost to ship the products have been on the rise. Regulators could accuse Meta of purposely subsidizing its headsets long enough to force out competitors that just couldn't afford to match the price. So that is a question that happened in the phone industry when we started to see the phone makers really kind of separating from the pack, including what Samsung has done and what Apple has done to control that market. A lot of that came through subsidies that were often and eventually controlled by regulation that really kind of changed the game a bit. And I think this might be the scenario that we're facing here with headsets. So 49.02% of people using VR with Steam were playing on a Quest 2, just to show you the dominance of what's happening out there. Here's the example, too, of Oculus Quest 2 versus the Rift versus the HTC Vive, and then Windows Mixed Reality, and then other. So you can kind of see pretty significant numbers here just in a short period of time. Market research firm IDC estimates the Quest 2 made up 78% of the virtual and augmented reality market. That's pretty controlling. If you think about that in comparison to the mobile market, you don't have that kind of dominance even with Apple, even though Apple, I would say, somewhat leads the position in terms of overall mobile. So I think that is going to play into the whole issue with how this rolls out. It's very possible that we could see the FTC and other regulation, along with a handful of competition elements, play into where this might go. When you talk about competition, here's an early look at the user experience for the PlayStation. This is the VR2. Another one that will play into it, obviously Sony is going to be a big player. They're going after this whole idea of see-through view, which I think is a cool feature. How this all plays out and who is the winner, still yet to be decided, I think, over time. This is kind of cool because I think it's going to be one of those new live streaming event, facilities. If you remember Google Glass, imagine Google Glass and how basic that was in comparison to what we're going to be seeing coming through these new VR and AR headsets. And of course, the mixed reality side of things too. These are some pretty cool graphics that they're showing here, just to show you in the element there. All right, so let's get into a couple other aspects here. And one of them, of course, is that Apple is developing their own mixed reality headset. This is just a quick rendering of it. Looks pretty Apple-esque, actually. Kind of looks like a watch band right there with, of course, the no-nonsense, no buttons kind of approach. These will be the components, I think, that Apple is, and here's the actual drawing, that came from Apple's possibility of Apple's mixed reality headset and their features. This, I think, will be the head-to-head component that Meta will be facing, is that ultimate decision on whether or not Apple's closed ecosystem, the App Store, can outpace an open metaverse. Now, my opinion is I compare that to maybe what AOL and the open internet was like in the early days of the evolution of the internet. AOL actually won that race. And the reason they did that was because they were able to make it super easy for onboarding and users that had never tried it before. And I feel like, in general, VR, AR, metaverse, all of that is going to have a certain effect of that. The difference is that we have two generations of population that are technically savvy, both Gen Z and also the millennials. That in itself and the growth of where that might be changes the dynamic quite a bit. So I think the uptake will be much better than even what we saw in the early stage of the internet. Here's Apple's new glove patent. So there you can tell they are after, let's kind of zoom in on that. They are after a lot of what's happening here, I think, in terms of development of hardware and what that might look like coming down the line. So definitely a lot happening around both hardware, the obvious evolution of what kind of apps and function we'll be utilizing in the metaverse. All of this, I think, plays into some very interesting things happening very soon. If you take a look at Meta's overall stock, this may be one of those times, guys, where we don't pick a lot of stocks, but if I look at just the overall performance of what Meta has done in the last year, you can kind of see back here was a little bit of the Cerveza dip, and it's almost right back to there. So all of these gains have been wiped out. Now, granted, a lot of that has been since this high right here. Let's take a look at that high and what that was down to right here. So we're right at 60% on the fall off. So with what's happening with them, as long as they don't get, the FTC doesn't get in and start, shackling what they're doing, and Apple doesn't make some sort of unbelievable announcement, it is quite possible that Meta may have the first mover position. They have accelerated this, and you can tell by losing, almost $3 billion in a quarter, they're not playing around here in terms of overall development. So I think this will continue to be a loss leader for Facebook and Meta. And I think that the potential here in terms of investment, this may be a great ground floor opportunity. Again, not investment advice, but if you're looking at, something like that. And again, I would start watching all of the crypto projects that start to look or have any indication that there's a partnership or a use case inside and in partnership with what Meta is doing, or the companies that Meta is clearly partnered with. So watch the Open Metaverse forum and what's happening there. Look at the companies that are starting to develop there. Look at the partnerships that are starting to form with Meta, and then watch for the blockchain entries, because those are going to be some very interesting companies and projects to watch. A lot happening out there. We're going to try to get to some questions just to give you guys a remembrance. There's just an old photo of Google when it first started in 1998. And this is kind of where I look at the metaverse today. A little bit more sophisticated, but at the era of time that this was launched in 1998, you have to remember what we were dealing with, the birth of the internet. Nobody knew what that was. Everybody questioned it, and everyone said it would never work. So you have to look at that with a grain of salt when you compare that to what's happening in blockchain and metaverse. Let's get into a few questions. I love it right here, Majestic Fox. Metaverse is a scam. That is the best terminology I have ever heard, because I've heard this about 100 times about a thing called the internet, and why I quit my job and my idea of what I really wanted to do out of college and went into technology, because I felt like this was going to be the future. Let's go to Initial Blast. Apple already led hardware, gadget, iPod, mouse, yada yada. Initially touchscreen with tech perfection and roadmap of its iPod. Yeah, so that I would agree too, for sure, is that Apple did lead out in terms of really separating themselves from a hardware case. The difference is that not a lot of companies had already made moves. Windows was way behind the hardware curve. Remember, we really didn't see much movement from Microsoft until the Surface products arrived, and that was a decade later. So it gave Apple a great run. I don't necessarily think there's anyone that's as close. I'd actually put Meta in Apple's place in 2005 if you kind of compared the two. I do want to jump to a poll real quick, see what you guys think about this one. All right, so who will be the Metaverse VR headset leader? You got Meta on the open ecosystem at 40. Apple still holding in there, but Sony coming up, and then Microsoft, Google, HTC, and others kind of coming in there. So it's still an open, and this is the way it should be. I think this is a good representation of where I think the market is. You guys are very smart about what's going to happen out there and what this means for blockchain and the future of a lot of these kind of projects. So it's good that you're keeping track of these. Hardware will be a part of it, but ecosystem of, as you've heard me often say, ecosystem and the unit capability of being able to turn that ecosystem and get it lit up and ignited is going to be the killer app. And I think that's where Facebook and Meta has the lead. Diamond Hands, I have an Oculus Quest 2. My favorite game is Beat. All right, there you go. Great to see you in there, Diamond Hands. Meta is going to be using Matic. Yes, we know that. That's why we love Matic so much. Matic, I think, is going to have a lot of play in the open metaverse, so watch out for Matic very closely. Headsets, data collection devices, metaverse, lab meta, data collection processing facility. Yeah, you're right. There's going to be a lot there. Also think about the whole aspect of use around medical, because we're going to see more and more of that use case. My wife is in the medical field, and she even tells me that starting to see a lot more studies around virtual and augmented reality use cases in the medical field. If that really pops, and then you have someone like Amazon who just bought Med1 or OneMed, that in itself, I think, starts to kind of reframe the whole facility of what we will be doing in 20 years for just going to the doctor or being able to do even complex procedures. There's a lot going to be happening here in this space. Jack, when Steve Jobs died, so did Apple. Rest in peace, man. That is so true, because you're right. Innovation hasn't really happened. They've literally just regened the killer app they have, which was the iPhone, iPad. Has there been anything that has really flown out from Apple beyond the watch? Maybe, and I think just the watch, because the device is smart enough to start giving us feedback, doing some more things, more advancement there. But the fact that they have not jumped on blockchain quicker has surprised me a little bit, for sure. Real Talk, thanks for the super chat. Will NFTs play an integral role in the metaverse? Absolutely. If so, who's the leader in NFTs? Listen, there's a lot right now. You could look at Yuga. You could look at some of the big gaming platforms, whether it be a Sandbox or an Axie Infinity. But I think that we have yet to see the real NFT leaders come out. And the reason I say that is this is because when you compare technology adoption to what we're dealing with right now in NFTs, it has a lot of the same similarities. And what I mean by that is that there's always the money grab, the scammers, those kind of things will happen in the early stages of any kind of revolution. And that's where we are right now. From that comes a fall. And that is when we'll see an absolute destruction of the market, and rising out of that are going to be the winners. And that's when I would start watching the NFT winners, because they may be projects and companies that aren't even created yet. So a lot yet to come. Paul, there is a silent race going on for the winning metaverse between Disney and Meta to collect user data. That's a very good point, because if you probably watched our video on Disney last week, and just in general, the attraction they have toward blockchain. The problem with Disney right now, it's Chapek. I mean, you have to look at their leader. He is not going to be the one that brings them into this at any scale. I think they'll have to have a leadership change before that really becomes a threat to someone. You cannot go head to head with Zuckerberg even though it is Disney, don't get me wrong. Disney's a great brand, but you've got to go head to head with someone who is very savvy, not only from business, but also the ability to develop partnerships. Disney does have that to a certain extent, but it's only because they have a great Rolodex. So I do like Disney, though. Don't get me wrong. I think it is one and will be one of the winners in this. Don't get me wrong. What's your take on Gala concerning Metaverse, please? So I still like Gala. It's they're a partner of our channel. I'm always intrigued with what they're doing. They just launched their film project. They've launched music this year. Gala Games has some of the best games in blockchain, I think, are out there. You've got the Grit and Epic connection. There's a lot happening there. If you're looking at investment-wise, company-wise, I think Gala is way out in front. When you look at the tokenomics from an investment side of things, if you're just looking at the token side, what I would say is really start doing a little bit deeper dive, because it is tokenomics-wise, there are some challenges there. But when I look at the potential, it's there for what Gala is trying to do. Kenny, Sony will win. They'll come out with first on everything. Remember Betamax? Yes, Walkman. Yeah, maybe. I think Sony is actually a little bit behind the curveball here, just a bit. Could they catch up? Sure. I mean, you have to remember that this is Sony. We're talking about one of the biggest titans in gaming that there is. And I think also the potential. The problem with Sony is they don't necessarily have the connection to the user base, like what, if you think about what Apple has in terms, I mean, they're setting on what, a few 100 million credit cards, yours. If you look at, what Meta is doing itself, over 1 billion users. You look at the connection of what Disney has in terms of their park, and also their Disney Plus and the evolution of what they'll do in terms of content. The key here is going to be connecting those dots to users and then being able to convert those users into Metaverse, which is going to be a ad revenue bonanza, as well as products and services that are going to start to roll in that. Going to be big. It was really funny when you paused saying 60% of people are doing fitness activities through Metaverse. Yeah, that's my point. I don't think that 60% of people, you can't get 60% of people off the couch. Trust me, it just doesn't work that way. I would put that more in like maybe the 20 to 30%. And that's it, maybe if it's really fun and interesting. Probably in the beginning, but as it gets, further in, there's a thing, it's called being hard to do something, and this thing called sweat, that's when it starts losing interest for everybody. Fitness won't pick up. It's a threat to the apparel and gym. Well, it is, but the other factor here is that I think apparels and gyms have really struggled with being able to really leverage into the next generation. Outside of, apparel lines like a Lululemon, there hasn't been many of those athleisure wears companies that have really exploded and created new categories like what Lululemon did. But if you look at that and kind of compare it to what that might look like in the metaverse, there's some opportunities here. I think there's some opportunities for some big brands, so watch out for that as well. All right, you guys are tuned in over on the podcast right now. Thanks for listening in. We appreciate all that. Make sure and check out our 3 o'clock live stream. We're going to be doing a big thing on the recession, what kind of effect this is going to have on Bitcoin, Ethereum, and a lot of the altcoins as well. So make sure and tune in there. If you guys want to reach me, it is out on Twitter, @Paul Barron. We'll catch you next time right here on Metaverse Insider.